It would take something pretty special, you would think, for Lewis to walk away. I would actually put money on Lewis retiring before Fernando Alonso at this point, just because it seems like Alonso just will never go away.
How do you expect the FIA to kind of handle this as we move forward? Because he said he's not going to shy away and he's not going to not speak his mind moving forward, nor should he, in my personal opinion.
The change to the International Sporting Code the FIA made over the winter shouldn't have been made anyway. It was completely unnecessary. Even if I had that much money, I definitely don't have space to store it. But
I'm gonna put it. Just get rid of your couch. You just sit in that and watch TV.
Just sit in the car.
Katie George, Nate Saunders, Laurence Edmondson. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, like this video, leave us a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to ESPN for more F1 content. And if you're listening, please hit us with a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Gentlemen, I know you've got a busy afternoon in the UK. How are you guys doing?
Good. Yeah, we're actually heading off to Alpine later. We've had a glimpse of it from Silverstone through some eagle-eyed people at the hotel there. But yeah, we're heading off for the final launch of the year. And then we've got all 10 cars, and then before you know it, boom, Bahrain, testing, first race, straight into it. It's crazy.
Okay, so full disclosure, we're recording this on Thursday afternoon in the UK, Thursday morning in the US. So we've seen all of the launches except Alpine. So if you're listening to us now, you probably know a little bit more than we do about what it looks like. But as Nate said, they've gotten a couple glimpses. So let's dive right in. Lewis was asked by Sky Sports, of course, about his future, which seems to be a hot topic at this point. And his answer, he said that he plans to be around for a bit. A bit is hard to quantify, I think. So I'd ask the two of you, Laurence, what do you think a bit really entails?
Well, I think that's entirely what is being discussed at the moment between Mercedes and Lewis. And I think, what is he, 38 now? Mm-hmm. So if he wants a bit to be 5 years, it can be 5 years. If he wants it to be just another 2, it can be another 2. And I think realistically, when he, the contract he's negotiating at the moment, it's also got a bunch of long-term clauses in. He wants to be associated with the Mercedes brand going forward. He said he wants to be involved in their green technology going forward, and also increasing diversity in motorsport and all the other areas that Mercedes have an interest in. So I think there's a lot of that going on. In terms of how long he's going to be on track, well, I guess a little bit depends on what happens, right? I mean, he definitely wants an 8th world title. There's no doubt about that. If he didn't, then he may as well retire right now. So a lot will depend on how it goes this year, what it looks like. If he gets that title, I feel like he'll still continue, because he has made this big point that he wants to do more years beyond his current contract, which ends at the end of this year. So, but whether that's 2 years, maybe 2 years and an option, I think is probably fairly common for a driver at his age. And I think he also knows that even if he just signed a 1-year contract, if he wanted to stay beyond that, Mercedes would be open to it. It's very hard to imagine a situation where Mercedes would be, "Oh no, Lewis, you've had your 1 year on your contract, we won't have you back." So I think it really is just quite open at the moment, and that's not a bad position to be in. And both Lewis and Toto, who of course will lead the negotiations from the Mercedes side in those contract talks, seem very relaxed about where they are with the contract. A few years ago, they signed it really, really late. It was during COVID. They signed the new contract very late ahead of the new season. But it wasn't really an issue in the end. He didn't really miss a beat in terms of what he was doing on track. So I think they're now at such a comfortable position between the two of them that they could leave the contract until the day before the first race, and it wouldn't actually impact the way that he goes racing.
And look at Fernando as well. He's still racing around in his early 40s, and he's not winning. He's not got a winning car. He's still got that desire. Lewis, obviously didn't win a race last year, but I just can't see. It would take something pretty special, you would think, for Lewis to walk away. Whether, I don't know, Russell beats him to a championship, or that relationship breaks down somehow. But I can't actually see that happening. And Laurence is right. His relationship with Mercedes is pretty good. So I think the only time Mercedes might start thinking, should we move on, is in a couple of years if someone like Lando Norris is available, and they're like, right, we need to find somebody for the post Hamilton era. We've obviously got Russell in, but you're going to start looking at who you replace him with. But that's a long way down the line yet. So yeah, I think he'll be around for the foreseeable. And I think Formula One's better off if he stays for 5-6 years. So hopefully he does. I'm not. Yeah, I mean, Fernando's probably going to be staying around for the same amount of time as well. I think I would actually put money on Lewis retiring before Fernando Alonso at this point, just because it seems like Alonso just will never go away. He never wants to leave. So yeah, but Lewis is still good enough, isn't he? Like he proved it last year. Didn't win those races, but he still has that fire in him. So yeah, I think he'll be around for a long time.
He was also asked about the FIA's political statement ban. And I think one of the most impressive things about Lewis is how passionate he is about issues and topics that he cares about. And he's, willing to go out on a limb and speak about those at different Grand Prix and use his platform in a variety of different ways. How do you expect the FIA to kind of handle this as we move forward? Because he said he's not going to shy away and he's not going to not speak his mind moving forward, nor should he, in my personal opinion. But how do you envision this kind of playing out with the FIA as we move forward in the 2023 season?
Well, the FIA haven't been clear on this. And I think this is what is now becoming an issue, is that fine, you can come out with, this essentially what is it seems like a ban or at least restrictions on what drivers can say. They just haven't clarified exactly what it means and what it will mean if drivers, come to a race and they talk to the FIA and they say, I want to make this point on the grid. And if the FIA then say no and they go and do it, what happens then? Will it be a sporting penalty? Will it be a financial penalty? And that just hasn't been made clear at all, and nor to the drivers, which is really surprising at this stage. We're not that far away from the first race, and it's a race in Bahrain, then a race in Saudi Arabia, countries where I think it is important to make stands on certain issues. And certainly Lewis has made that clear in the past that he'd want to make stands on certain issues in those countries. So it's a remarkable situation really to be in, and I think it's important that someone like Lewis, who we know has a history of saying what he thinks, standing up for what he believes in, and as I agree with you, Katie, rightly so. And he's now saying that, look, no one's going to stop me saying what I want to say, and he's in a position within the sport where he can do that. I think I can't imagine a situation where the FIA would turn this into a bigger thing than it needs to be, because the negative headlines around Formula One, especially if it happens at the start of the season, would be immense and would eclipse anything that happens on track. So I think that's a situation probably even the FIA don't want to get into. But it's still up in the air, and it just shouldn't be. I mean, in my opinion, the change to the International Sporting Code the FIA made over the winter shouldn't have been made anyway. It was completely unnecessary, and it wasn't entirely clear what it was a reaction to. I suppose it was something or other that happened last year, or some kind of statement which has been made recently. But they've never been clear on that either. So we're still at this stage talking about this. I think that the drivers have made clear that they're pretty frustrated with it too. And so hopefully we'll get some clarity in the next week, really, because it needs to be, because Bahrain's just around the corner.
Yeah, there's an F1 Commission meeting, isn't there, next week? And from what I understand, that's a big. I mean, there's a lot of FIA related things to talk about, but I think that's the key thing. I think people want to go to Bahrain and know exactly what that looks like. So, but yeah, Laurence is right. I mean, that to me, that's one of the most baffling. We've talked about the FIA president on previous podcasts, but the fact they've just left that completely open is completely baffling to me, because they could have amended that and said, look, by the way, here's what this means in principle for everyone. We've put it in here for XYZ reason. So yeah, just bizarre. And I don't think they can risk a situation where, like with FIFA, when they said to the English FA, can't wear the rainbow armband, the headlines that caused. Luckily for FIFA, there was about 25 days of football that followed that. But obviously in Formula One, it's not quite as, you'd have, like Laurence said, another race in Saudi then to follow that up. So you could see how it would snowball into something bigger.
We've seen a bunch of different launches, I would say, in the process and the way things have been done. Laurence, who do you think, if you had to rank them, had the best car launch?
Well, I'm a little bit biased because I got invited along, but I think Ferrari's launch, pretty much across the board, everyone's agreed is the best way to do it. They leaned into everything that they have. They have this amazing factory, beautiful surroundings in northern Italy, and they have their own test track, and they did it perfectly. They got their fans involved, brought 500 of them into a temporary grandstand by the track that they own, sending the car out on track. What better way to start off a season? And it was incredibly brave because, as we've seen with other teams, and as we know, these shakedown events or demonstration days, whatever you want to call them, technically the Ferrari one was a demonstration day because it was limited to 15 kilometers on track. Problems happen on these. It's the first time a car goes out on track. Small things that have not been seen in simulations, not been seen on the dyno and so on can crop up. So the car could have got out on track, sputtered about 10 meters down the road and stopped, and Charles Leclerc would have had to get out and all the mechanics would have had to run down and push it back. But that didn't happen. They got it right. And it went out and did, I think, about 2 or 3 laps. And then Carlos Sainz got in, it did 2 or 3 laps more. But it was such a great atmosphere. And going there and being a part of it was pretty cool. We were in a temporary media center in one of the stables next to Enzo Ferrari's old farmhouse, which is this beautiful 3-story white stucco building with red shutters and a big yellow Ferrari flag coming out the front. It's just so cool. And it ties into so many of the iconic moments in Ferrari history. I remember Michael Schumacher in 1996 when they first launched a car with Schumacher driving it. That was the year. And they had this photo of them stood, Luca de Montezemolo, Michael Schumacher and Eddie Irvine with the new car on the track. And they recreated that again. So there's so much history there and they lead into it. And I think they absolutely nailed it.
And I think it's just important to reference best car launch versus best livery are 2 very different things. So Nate, do you agree that Ferrari set the standard?
Yeah, I do. I was watching it and I felt a bit like a fan again. Obviously we watch those things with a journalist hat on, but I loved it. I think Laurence had it right. They lent into the noise beforehand. I mean, they played the Italian national anthem beforehand, which, I'm a massive sucker for that anyway. And I mean, and Laurence is right. Given just remember what we've been saying about Ferrari and how Ferrari fans have been reacting to Ferrari over the past few years. Can you imagine if that car had just broken down on that first lap? Just how people would, I think people would have just been like, you know what, I'm not watching Formula One ever again. So I think, that was great. And I think it probably set the bar a bit too high because I don't think teams are going to start doing that, every single year. It seems like things have come together. But hey, I mean, I'm glad Ferrari did it because it's rare you kind of tick all those boxes. So we're a bit, we don't always get as many launches. Like back in the day, the launches used to look incredible. Like every single year there was these huge big things. That's the best one I can remember seeing, and I was incredibly jealous that Laurence was out there. I was sat at home in Reading watching it and wishing I was out there. But yeah, it looked mega, and everyone who went said the same thing. So good job to Ferrari, and hopefully this is the key now, isn't it? Hopefully that sets the tone for their year. Hopefully it's not like, well, their launch was good but nothing else was, so hopefully it is a sign of things to come, but we'll see.
Laurence, what kind of notes do you feel like other teams should take from what Ferrari did well?
Keep it simple and give the people what they want. People want to see the car fairly soon after tuning in. They don't want loads of kind of marketing nonsense thrown their way. And if you can get it on track and you can let them see it, hear it, get as close to feeling it as possible, then do it. And so, it'll be interesting to see if other teams do take any lessons from that, because I think, like I said earlier, across social media, across other journalists I talked to, and even some people at other teams, I think everyone was in agreement that Ferrari got it right. But as Nate just mentioned, it's absolutely no indication of how a season will go. I wrote an article about what a brilliant event it was, and then somebody came back and said, "Oh, I see ESPN supporting Ferrari again going into the season." It's like, whoa. We haven't said they're going to win the title based on.
And I like that again, as if we'd somehow. I mean, I've been the biggest, most disappointed Ferrari fan going for a long time. I think a key note to take for teams is only put an event on if you've got something to show. And in this case, Ferrari did. They tweaked delivery, but they clearly were like, we're going to do something for the fans here. We're going to make it special. Mm-hmm. And I thought that, look, I totally understand teams have departments that like work on these launches and stuff like that. But Aston Martin was quite an interesting launch because they had this long event and then they revealed what was essentially the same car, and I think fans see that and they get a bit frustrated. And I totally get it. Teams have sponsors and partners that pay a lot of money to be on the car and pay a lot of money to be mentioned at these things. But it just, I think, and Red Bull was a classic example, wasn't it? It was a long event. And then, they did have something to show there. They had the Ford Red Bull thing, but it was maybe not what fans were expecting or hoping that they would see. So I think that's the main thing. If you're going to go big with an event, fans expect there's going to be something big. There's going to be a big payoff at the end of it. I went to McLaren on Tuesday, and Ariana, the host, from the very beginning said, look, 20 minutes, that's all you got to sit through. We're going to interview the drivers. We're going to interview Zach Brown, Andrea Stella, have a quick video, and then the car comes out. And I thought that's good because they kind of laid it out from the beginning.
Set the expectation.
Yeah, and it was clear what was going to happen. The car was underneath, a thing behind them, so that was clear. So, but yeah, I think all of the others have kind of paled in comparison to the Ferrari one.
Well, one of the car reveals that was highly anticipated and always is Mercedes in the W14. They had kind of alluded to possibly going back to an all black livery, which obviously now we know it is in fact. And I thought it was a very pretty car. But the bodywork, I think, is very similar to what we saw a season ago. And we know that they had struggles, Laurence. So were you surprised to see the narrow side pods again? Were you surprised to see so many similarities in the W13 as we saw in the reveal for the W14?
Not especially because they had told us at the end of last year. I mean, throughout last year, they were being asked, will you change your concept entirely next year? Can you change it perhaps during last season to try and gain some of that performance back that clearly wasn't there from what they expected at the start of the year? So not overly surprised to see the car have a lot of similarities to last year. And I think it became clear as last season progressed, it wasn't really the stuff we were seeing, the visual kind of bodywork on top of the car that was necessarily the issue. It was what was going on underneath with the floor of the car, and also how they were able to then run the car, and they were trying to run it incredibly low to access all this downforce that their simulations had told them they could get. But as soon as they ran the car as low to the track as they did, it was almost an impossible ride for the drivers to deal with. It was bouncing around. It was triggering aerodynamic porpoising, as we called it. We talked a lot about that last year. So we don't need to go into that just yet. But all of that stuff. So it was a bit of a mess. So I think the important thing is that they learned the lessons there, and then they've applied them to this one. And in a way, it is reassuring for Mercedes fans that they haven't had to completely rip up everything and start again, because if there is if there is potential in this concept that they have, that's far better than going back to the drawing board trying to copy what Red Bull have done and
Agreed.
start a year behind, or even more, really, because obviously all the time going into last season that teams had to prepare it the year before. So that would have been, I think, more worrying if we'd seen a Red Bull copycat car kind of come out at their launch, because then you'd think, right, okay, Merc really are starting from square one. Whereas now we're thinking, well, that if they can make this work, they can, if they can get it on track and not have all the issues they had last year, and have a drivable car, which they were starting to get towards the end of last year. They won a race in Brazil. Then that's a very positive thing for them, and hopefully a positive thing for a competitive championship for us all to watch.
And yeah, I agree completely with what Laurence said about it being good the car design has stayed the same, because I think the worst fear that people had was last year Mercedes seemed to be getting their head around things. Obviously, we're quite a long way back in the championship. So that for them to come out with that, that to me was the most impressive thing. I love delivery, but the fact they'd kept that concept, if there's any team that's going to outdevelop Red Bull, I actually think it's Mercedes. I still think there's doubt over whether Ferrari can do that. Hopefully they prove me wrong. So yeah, and just on that, in terms of converging, when Mercedes were dominating, a lot of the teams started to copy, their concepts aerodynamically, their concepts around the engine as well. And obviously we saw how that played out. Mercedes just kept this big advantage in front of everyone because, like Laurence said, you fall a bit behind if you copy people. So I think it's positive for the new year going into it. And 21 was so good, when Mercedes and Red Bull were close together. So hopefully Mercedes can take that step forward and kind of recreate that. Because I think that in everybody's mind, that's what you associate with that black car is Max v Lewis. Someone made a point, like the last time that Mercedes had a black car was when Max got past Lewis on that final lap in Abu Dhabi. So for me, it was kind of, I know there were other reasons behind them stripping back the paint and going to black, but it was almost like, right, we went back to silver, didn't work. Let's go back to this car that, did so well for 2 seasons. And yeah, just get back at it. So hopefully that's what we see, because like we keep saying, a 3-way championship fight is kind of what we feel is so close to happening, but whether or not it does happen is another question.
Remember what Daniel Ricciardo said to us? Like, sometimes there's some superstition involved. Like, if you win in a car, you want to go back to that kind of livery. And that's why Red Bull hasn't made a whole lot of changes to what we see on their livery, because it's worked clearly. And it's been an unbelievable car. Now, we did get to see the W14 hit the track, much like Ferrari did. There was some hoopla online about how the shakedown went for Mercedes, and engine misfires and engine issues was thrown out. Well, we have the hard-hitting facts here on Unlapped. Do we not,
Always.
Laurence Edmondson, because of your contact? So tell us, what exactly went down in Mercedes shakedown?
Yeah, well, these are close events, so the truth is we don't know 100%. But I have asked the team because in these occasions, it's all you can do. And I think the misunderstanding is that often when teams go and do these runs pre-season, they're 100-kilometer days, and so you expect to see quite a lot of stuff coming out, photos and everything. And yesterday in the press release they said George Russell and Lewis Hamilton will hit the track in the new Mercedes, and we only got photos of George Russell. And then the rumors start to build, and then it's like, oh, has the car broken down? Did it have problems? And then there were these suggestions that there was misfires with the power unit. So Mercedes say they had a 15-kilometer demo day on the launch day, so on the day when you first saw the car, which is exactly what Ferrari did with their just handful of laps around Fiorano. And then today, so we're recording on Thursday, they have the full 100-kilometer filming day where they're going to put more laps on it. And they said there are always issues, and that's true with these new cars. There are always issues. There's a huge amount of sensors and electronic stuff within the car that has to talk to each other, has to operate. So it seems like they did have some minor issue, but they said it was nothing of what was speculated online around PU issues, power unit issues, so engine issues. So yeah, make of that what you will. Perhaps not the perfect start for Mercedes, but probably nothing to worry about. And the other thing is the reason teams use these promotional event days, these filming days, these demonstration days, because, they're doing a demonstration day and they're not demoing in front of any fans, as that kind of rule is intended. The idea of that being in the rules is that you can then take a car, let's say, to an event in central London and run it down the street and people can see this year's F1 car in action. So obviously they're not using it for that reason, but the reason they do it, and it's very much a sporting reason, which is to flush issues out, so that when they get to Bahrain, they don't have, if there was an issue yesterday, that occur on the car, because that can take away valuable testing time. You got to remember, this year teams only have 3 days. So 3 days of testing. And if you divide that in two between the two drivers, that's 1.5 days each on track before they go and race it. And that's not much. So if you have an issue which keeps the car in the garage for even an hour and a half, which is entirely possible with, a sensor issue or some kind of, communication among the car systems not working, that's hugely costly. But if you get it out the way on a wet day at Silverstone, and you still get your 15 kilometers, and then you do another 100 the next day, it's not really an issue. So so that's what they did, and by the sounds of it, that's where they were. I mean, slightly auspicious start, going out and perhaps having an issue of some sort. Ferrari definitely didn't have that, because I was there. I saw the track. Saw the car on track, and then saw Carlos Sainz go out on track. But that's not going to win you a championship, as we talked about before. These launches, these demo days, these filming days are not the difference between winning a championship or not. Our producer Dave pointed out that Red Bull had a bunch of reliability issues early in the season when we were talking about this beforehand, and yes, that was a big issue at the first 3 races, but then Max won the championship by however many points it was. So it's these little things people, I think, read a lot into, get very excited about, but it is part of the process of a new car, a brand new prototype, basically a science project on wheels, going out on track for the first time and learning about it. So that's where we are with Mercedes, but I wouldn't worry about it yet. If we have 3 days of awful testing for Mercedes in Bahrain, sure, we'll get worried about it, but not yet.
Yeah, and Laurence and I always like this time of year because, we used to run a live text blog around testing, and half the questions we'd get, there'd be an hour in and people say, so who's going to win the championship? And you're like, we don't know yet. It's impossible to guess. And I think there is this kind of, I totally get it, because it's why it's what with any sport you want to know who the favorites are and stuff. But I remember a story. Laurence might have to fact check this, or he might know the story. But I remember hearing that in 2014, when Mercedes first fired up their V6 engine, it didn't initially fire up, and obviously that engine turned out to be the dominant engine for the next 6 years. I remember they were just, they were firing up at the factory, and they're like, this isn't actually firing up, So had that story leaked, at the time, I guess people might be like, well, Mercedes are in trouble, which obviously they were like, no, it just, I think it fired up like the next time they tried it or whatever it was. But there's just a story of they were waiting for it, great anticipation, and then nothing happened. So I think sometimes these things can be overplayed, but testing, that's one of the great things about testing. You can tell pretty quickly in testing the teams that are really in trouble, and it's through the mileage, like Laurence said. So I can remember back when McLaren were having that awful time with Honda, you'd have some of these teams doing, nearly 200 laps a day, and McLaren were pretty pleased if they got into double figures. They're like, well, we got 12 laps today, and you could tell that like this team's really in trouble because they're having issues they should be having at shakedowns throughout the test. And I think Laurence is right as well to point out about Mercedes. I'm not sure if it was the same last year, but one trait of theirs every preseason test in the time I've been covering Formula One, at least, is as soon as the clock starts on that first day, Mercedes is always the first one out. They go straight out, get out on the racetrack. And I think last year maybe Red Bull did that, but Mercedes, went out fairly quickly after as well. So a lot of teams like to just, as soon as it starts, they say we're no messing around. We want to get straight out there. So I don't think it's a huge deal. But who knows? I mean, if this time next week, we might be saying, hey, Mercedes hasn't been out the garage yet. And then you start to think maybe there's trouble in paradise, or whatever you call Mercedes. I'm not saying maybe last year it wasn't quite paradise there, but that would be concerning. But right now we're okay.
I'm so excited that you guys obviously are going to finally get to see all of the cars in person in a week's time out in Bahrain, because obviously we've seen photos and you've been to some of the launches in person, but photos can be different in person, obviously, as we know. And so if you had to choose just purely based on livery at this point, who blew you away with their concept?
Well, my favorite livery is still the Alfa Romeo. It has a lot of black carbon fiber on it, and but it's that red, and I think also the last year of Alfa Romeo, I think like they've really gone to town and they've really kind of refined the cool like Alfa Romeo look over that time. And I mean, I love the Alfa Romeo brand. It's such a historic one. It goes back so far in motorsport as well, albeit the current car isn't really made by Alfa Romeo. It's a badging exercise, but still, I think that one looks fantastic. But I will reserve a bit of judgment, like you said, because we saw a number of cars last year start off with these beautifully painted, intricate liveries, and then they started just scraping the paint away to save weight, which is obviously a key factor of why we've seen so many cars with bare carbon fiber on them so far this year. And sometimes carbon fiber is a beautiful material, and certainly when it's made to look beautiful, if you see it inlaid in a kind of Ferrari road car or whatever, or a Lamborghini, and it looks stunning. But the kind of carbon fiber they use to make these cars, it's not there to look pretty. It's there to be strong. It's there to be strong in certain ways. And often you'll have different weaves of carbon fiber next to each other, and it can actually look quite messy. So I'm going to wait and see exactly what all this bare carbon fiber looks like before I make my final judgment. But based purely on the photos and what we saw at the launches, I think that Alfa Romeo looks stunning.
I'm just really quickly, do you have $500,000 on hand, Laurence?
We might have to dig into our Vegas fund, actually.
I know. And maybe if we pull our money together, we can actually buy Alfa Romeo's launch car. Did you see that they're selling the launch car? It doesn't drive. It's not operable, but there are some gadgets inside and the wheels do turn. But right now, the first bid is at $125,000. And they're expecting, ultimately, there's a couple days left, I believe, in bidding, but they expect it to go for about $500,000.
Yeah. I mean, that's very, very cool. I even if I had that much money, I definitely don't have space to store it. But
I'm gonna put it, just get rid of your couch. You just sit in that and watch TV.
Just sit in the car. Yeah.
I mean, that'd be a great way to watch an F1 race, just sitting there turning the wheels of your big Alfa Romeo show car.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I definitely couldn't fit one in my. I'm looking at the dimensions now. I might be able to. I should be able to, but I'd have to get rid of everything. But yeah, I agree with Laurence. The Alfa Romeo was great, but I'm a sucker for Ferrari, and I love that they put the Ferrari name on the rear wing. So I'd put Ferrari just ahead of Alfa. But there's some good liveries this year. The Mercedes looks great. I actually think Red Bull doesn't get enough praise for its livery. I think the Red Bull. I know they kind of baited everyone with their launch event, but like one of the reasons they don't need to change that livery is because it looks mega. So yeah, Ferrari wins it for me. What about you, Katie? Which was your favorite one?
I thought Alfa Romeo's was beautiful, to Lawrence's point. I'm glad that Mercedes went back to black. Like, I was really nervous that they were alluding, teasing, and then it wasn't actually going to be much of a change, which we were all going to be disappointed. But I don't know if it's recency bias or not. I agree with you. I think the Red Bull, and I was kind of irritated too in person. Like, I can't really even tell like a difference. Like, could you at least change one aspect of it? But you don't see that navy and you don't see that orange often. And I just think that red, orange, that's up for debate. But I think that midnight blue kind of is so iconic at this point. It's a really nice combo of colors. I actually thought the Williams combination of colors, they've got a lot going on, more so than those others that I mentioned. But I thought Williams was really pretty, but I really do like the Red Bull. It's become iconic. And maybe that's because I just like the ones that win. It's easy to like the ones that get results.
I think there's something to that. I think as soon as a car wins a championship, I think that look becomes ingrained in your head. It becomes a winning car. Because I've always wondered, that like the Brawn GP car from 2009 was a great looking car, but I think that part of what's made it so legendary, it was so simple. It had that great green kind of lining, but I think that because it won the championship as well, it was always at the front. You always saw it every race. It was always out in front. It has kind of solidified it as one of those great liveries. I'm not saying it was a bad one, but I think it's because it won. I think it's gained a lot of kind of notoriety for that reason. So I think that's something.
The interesting story about that as well is the reason it was so much of it was left white was because they were trying to entice sponsors to stick their name across it. So you had this kind of car which came out and it did have that. I think it was a really well designed and cool livery, but they left big bits of it white because they just wanted to say to sponsors, look, you can stick your name across here. You'll have a white background. It will stand out, and they were really willing to do anything to get people to invest money in that team, because after they'd bought it from Honda, there was, they knew they had a great car in their hands, but they didn't know whether they'd be able to maintain that, and they needed money. So it's also interesting, how teams come about and how they kind of reach these kind of iconic designs that go down in history. I mean, for me, the McLaren with the Marlboro colors, I mean, really, it was just one giant cigarette package going around a track, but with Ayrton Senna's yellow helmet poking out the top, it just looks so cool, so cool.
Yeah. It does.
So I think success has a lot to do with how good these cars look.
Testing's right around the corner. We're obviously thrilled. Drive to Survive's dropping
right in the middle
days,
of it.
In the middle of it, right? On February 24th. So that's just around the corner. That has us excited. So I want to dive in just briefly here on Drive to Survive, because we're obviously going to watch it here and we'll break down the episodes and what we thought and the drama, obviously, that unfolds because we witnessed it all. You guys on the ground for most of it last season and during 2022 season. What storylines that you remember are you most excited to see play out on Drive to Survive?
I'm hoping they were in some of those driver meetings when they were clamping down on the jewelry and stuff like that in Miami. I think that would have been fascinating to see what the reaction to that was. Obviously, the Danny Rick storyline kind of played out over multiple races with him being dropped by McLaren. So I'd say those two. And then, to be honest with you, the thing I'm most interested to see, actually, because it became a big story in itself, is just how Max is with this series. I think they've set aside some time to talk to him, but just following him, even if it's a little bit during that season when he was that good, and he had so many things just going his way. He was dominating. I'd be fascinated to see that. But yeah, those cameras. It's interesting, isn't it? Because Laurence can will have experienced this as well. Every race weekend when something happens, the journalists are like, who are Netflix with this weekend? And that becomes the thing of like, who are they okay here? And I'm pretty sure they were with Ferrari at one of their like really nightmarish races. I'm trying to remember which one off the top of my head, but I remember that coming away, everyone was like, yeah, they're with Netflix are with them today. So maybe we'll get a Ferrari calamity episode or two. But who knows? I think the teams obviously have a bit of a say in the output. So I don't think we'll see anything majorly embarrassing. But yeah, so I've just listed off about 4 or 5 things there. So haven't left much for Laurence to come into. But yeah,
well, I completely agree with most of those, especially the Ferrari stuff. I think that'd be interesting. But again, you're right. Depends how much access they get. And I suppose the other one was right at the start of the year, Nikita Mazepin leaving Haas and everything that went around with that. Yeah. Haas, of course, have always been such a deep well of kind of fun quotes and shouting and swearing for Netflix over the years that I think, potentially we might actually see or find out some stuff that we didn't know through that one. So I hope they go into depth on that and have some fly on the wall stuff, because I think that's the real strength of these Netflix series. It's when they spend time with the characters away from the normal area of the paddock, in their driver rooms or even in just the car going to the circuit, and they pick up on the little bits of conversation. And when it's not staged, when it's not Christian Horner clearly knowing that the mic is above his head and saying something, quick and funny and all the rest of it, the best bits is when you get that honesty and that gritty reality. So hopefully we'll get a bit of that. And it's I kind of have a love-hate relationship with that series now, because I think it is entertaining, but some of it is just trying so hard to push certain narratives. And I completely agreed with Max when he decided that he wasn't going to give them any time because he felt that they were twisting narratives and making up stories. And it ceases to be a true documentary. It becomes I don't know, partly it's a PR exercise for F1, partly it's a kind of almost like a soap opera, and when the characters then start to play up to that as well, I think you just lose some of what makes it really good. My hope is that they pick up some of that. And then also just some of the profiling of the drivers. I think that's one of the real strengths of that series. I was thinking of the Yuki Tsunoda episode they did in the last series. I thought that was very strong, where you just get to know some of the drivers who aren't in the spotlight all the time. So away from Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton and so on, and some of the drivers further down the grid, and just what it's like to live this ridiculous life of a racing driver, whether it be on private jets or in the gym or running around Monaco, stuff like that. I find it really interesting because, even a lot of people who work in the sport don't get to see it at that level. So that's my hope for it. But yeah,
I hope they don't exercise too much control from Ferrari standpoint, even Red Bull standpoint, because I do think the rawness of when things don't go well, that's what's so fascinating, right? Like I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of those debriefs when things went really awry for Ferrari. I mean, this is part of the sport, right? It happens where strategy breaks down or you have to pick one driver over the other. Like I would love to hear how Red Bull navigated, obviously Checo being very upset with team orders and favoring Max in those instances. I know it's difficult to talk about and you don't want to air your dirty laundry, but also like that's the realness of what these guys have to go through day in and day out. And so as a sports fan, as an F1 fan, I like having some kind of semblance of what the reality really is, what the pressure really is like. And so hopefully we get to see some of that. I'm not super hopeful because I understand they obviously have brands to protect and obviously they're going to do that as best to the ability that they can. But I do think that yes, triumphs are very exciting to watch, but also, when people have struggles, that's also a realness and the beauty of the sport, right? That you have to go through. So I'll be so curious to see, exactly what's shown and what's not. And, Laurence, to your point, Max was originally a part of season 1. And then, the narrative quickly kind of shifted into Max being painted as this villain, I guess, on the grid, I think is a fair way to put it. And so there was a hiatus where Max really wasn't involved and didn't sit down and do interviews with Netflix. Do we know exactly how much time he gave Netflix this season? Because he's returned in theory, but I don't think that he's given them full access to follow him around as much as maybe some of the other drivers, Nate.
Yeah, so from my understanding, he sat down for one session with them, so that's about an hour and a half, maybe an hour. So it would have probably been towards the end of the season, so they would have known, here's what we want to talk about. So I don't think he'll feature massively, but I think his main point was he said some things in the whichever season it was that dealt with him and Ricciardo. I think it was season 1, wasn't it? And they took a lot of his quotes and made it out like, he hated Danny Rick and stuff. Which he didn't like, and I think that's the main thing. I think part of it as well that will be interesting is I think Max has kind of said, yeah, I'll talk to you, and he's going to sit down and see how they use what he gave them, and then he might turn around and say, look, I gave you a second chance, and actually I don't think this is any better, and then he might just say, he's the kind of guy, Max would just be like, I'm done. There's no convincing me. Because what's interesting is that he had talks with Netflix and Stefano Domenicali last year, F1's boss, obviously, who kind of was like, look, it's in everyone's best interests if the world champion's involved. So, yeah, it'll be interesting though. And, but it'll be a shame if he's not in it. And I think that's one thing to go to what Laurence said about love-hate. I do really, I've enjoyed some bits of the Netflix show, but I found it interesting last year that I have a lot of friends who kind of got into racing or into Formula One based on Drive to Survive, especially over the pandemic. They watched the seasons up until 2021, and then they watched that season for the first time. And then when they watched Drive to Survive at the start of last year, about 2021, I think a lot of people were like, oh, actually, a lot of this isn't exactly how it went down. You see that there's, I remember in that season last year, they kept on making out that, when you got to like Austin, the only thing everyone was talking about was McLaren v Alpine or Haas trying to get 6th position or whatever it is in the championship, and it's kind of like, that's not really the case. People weren't watching that lap by lap. So we'll see if they've moved away from that. But at the same time, I've been watching the tennis equivalent that Netflix have done, and it seems like they've lent into a similar thing. So it's obviously effective for them, and it's probably not made for. I don't think it's quite made for me specifically. A journalist who's been doing it for this long. But it's still good entertainment. And but the one I want to see down the line is I want to see what's ended up on the cutting room floor, because you think about the amount of stuff they film. I'm always amazed. My main fear going into it, and Laurence probably can relate to this as well. My main fear is that I'm just in the background somewhere asking a silly question or pulling a silly face, because we're in so many of these media sessions where they're clearly using the answers to some of the questions at media sessions and stuff like that. But so far I've managed to stay out of it. So that's my main fear. Usually I binge through it purely for that. I'm like, I need to know if I've said something dumb and they've put it in. I need to know so I can kind of, I don't know, get my PR strategy ready or something like that. But as far as I know, someone's watched it, and I was very selfish. It was like, "Did you see me in it?" And I'm like, "I wasn't looking out for you, Nate." But I said, "Well, you should have been." But that means I clearly didn't show up, so I think that's good.
Yeah, there's a number of interviews I've done, one-on-one interviews as well, and you sign away this right when you pick up your pass at the start of the year. I'll be halfway for an interview, and then you'll notice this like boom mic come over your head. And George Russell before, when he was at Williams about to move to Mercedes. I think he'd just moved to Mercedes. And then again with Gunther, I was actually doing some work for Nate's article about the Mazepin situation at the start of the year. And again, the same thing, kind of like camera turned up, boom mic came in. So with the George one, they obviously the answers weren't interesting enough, the questions weren't good enough, didn't make it into it. But it does make you realize as well how much, like Nate says, how much content they get and how much stuff there is. And to be able to pick through some of that. And of course, the most interesting bits would be the bits the team says, you're not putting that bit in, you're not having so-and-so saying that, or looking at the camera like that. That would be fascinating to get hold of. But I guess that's going to be locked away indefinitely.
Well, I've been for beers with a team press officer that I know quite well, and he just said after we'd had a couple of beers, he didn't tell me anything privileged, but he was like, dude, if you could see some of the stuff that doesn't make it in. And I was just like, man, like that's almost the show you want to see then. For sure. You totally understand why, they've got to kind of maintain that kind of difficult relationship with F1. The teams are giving them the access, so you can't just turn around and be like, as much as we'd like that, it's put them in a difficult position. So it's a shame. So I hope that knowledge doesn't ruin people watching it this time around.
But to your point, Nate, about your friends watching it and kind of feeling like it was a different representation of what they remember going through the season live, with all the access that you guys say that they have, I will say the last season I thought was pretty frustrating in the event that it felt like they just kept going over the same few races over and over and over again. And I just felt like there has been kind of a decline from a production standpoint. And also, I'm not an editor. I don't produce shows. So it's easy for me to sit over here in my ivory tower and make criticisms. But it felt like it got a little lazy, as we've gone in terms of what they've shown. And so I, as a fan sitting at home, I wondered, well, is the access dwindling a little bit? And so they don't have as much to show, but seems like they're filming anything and everything. And then you wonder, how much are they allowed to show based on what you guys mentioned with the teams coming in and F1 coming in and saying, this needs to be a good representation of our product. So it's hard to know what to believe and what not. But I hope that we get to see a variety of different races in this season, because there were so many fascinating ones last season, and we get to see all angles, right? All teams, all drivers represented, because I feel like last season that was missing.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. And I think lazy. I think lazy is probably a good way to put it. I mean, the one that really, though. It is tough. And like you said, I don't know. I don't know the first thing about editing that stuff, but one moment that stood out for me that I thought was just unnecessary was the way they cut around the Grosjean crash when that happened. That episode they had, they made it, they added all this dramatic music, and they made it seem like Grosjean was in the car for like 3 minutes, and there's all this and it's like, just let that play out how it happened, because it was incredible the way that played out, and it was dramatic enough. And yet they added all these different scenes. And a driver actually said to me once off record, he was like, why did they take the most like dramatic and unique thing that's ever happened in Formula One and kind of stretch that out the way they did? So I think sometimes you can be too obsessed with the storyline and the desire for like a dramatic moment or whatever it is, that you can lose track. Because like you said, Katie, like it did seem like they kept going back to the well almost. Like, it's like, right, we'll go back to this race. We've got this footage of Norris like locking up and going wide. We'll go back to that again for the 5th time. It's like, well, you must have more stuff. So, but we'll see. Hey, new series might be great. So I don't want to. We'll probably be doing the next episode being like, best series we've ever seen.
I know.
completely revising our opinions. Who knows?
So next week, okay, just to tease ahead, we will have our reactions to some of the episodes. I don't know if we can all 3 get through all of them. Challenge accepted on my end. I don't have much going on Sunday,
it's
so
it's
we'll
a good
see.
challenge. Now there's no NFL on, Katie. I need to watch something on my
Exactly. So maybe we do binge the whole entire season, and we can break things down for you. But we will have reaction episodes starting next week as the guys get ready to head to Bahrain because testing is right around the corner. You guys have fun at Alpine tonight. Can't wait to see your all's reactions online and on ESPN.com. As always, thank you for your insight. It's great being with you guys. This was another show of Unlapped. Give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcast, and make sure you subscribe to ESPN F1 on YouTube. Peace.